Hello my friends, welcome to another video. Today we're going to paint this beautiful loose style watercolor composition. Beautiful flowers of different shapes. We're going to start this composition from the main flower that I decided to create in light colors. And in particular I want to start from the center of the main flower. And so I start by using my round brush in size 6. And I just touch with the tip of my brush the paper in order to create this center. It's a bright yellow center. I then take my filbert brush and I start with some warm colors. In this case, this is quinacridone magenta. And I start by creating a few petals, external petals, close to this yellow center of this flower. The petals are created by touching the paper with the point of the brush and then dragging the brush and using also the belly of the brush. I'm using different colors and different concentrations of these colors. For example, now I'm adding a little bit of magenta that is more concentrated, and for example, to create these external petals that are going around the center, these petals are less concentrated and more watery, therefore there is more water on my brush and less pigment. I like to mix together the magenta color with the yellow ochre to create this first flower, and I just use my filbert brush to create these petals that are short petals, just by touching with the point of my brush and the belly of my brush the paper. I start to create the second flower by adding a little bit of cobalt blue to the magenta color. This is a beautiful purple color. I use my filbert brush and I use the point of my brush and the belly of my brush to create these longer petals compared to the first flower. This flower has longer petals, and I'm able to create these petals by dragging my filbert brush using the belly or the point of my brush and pointing all the petals towards the center. I used a little bit of magenta to create some contrast in the center of the flower, while the blue, cobalt blue, is still wet. I add some concentrated cobalt blue in the center of this petal, and I create this beautiful effect of blending of the colors. I use more magenta to create more contrast, and I'm using the side of my brush and the belly of my brush to create these small strokes. All the petals are leading towards the same center because this flower has a round shape overall, and we want all the petals to be leading to the same center. When I start the third flower, I think to use similar colors to the second one, therefore I mix a little bit of magenta and cobalt blue. The shape of this third flower is round. All the petals are leading to the same center that I will create afterwards, and I'm using different concentration of pigment and water. The first layer of these petals is very watery. There is a high amount of water and little amount of pigment. But I'm adding more concentrated pigment to create contrast and more dimension. I started to create the fourth flower below the first one because I want a balanced composition, and I feel that at the moment the top of the paper is very heavy in weight. I proceed with the same technique using the filbert brush, the belly and the side of the brush to create different petals of this flower. I still use warm colors and I add the contrast pigment like magenta to create more dimension and to give the impression that there are more petals on this flower. I love to use the wet on wet technique to allow different colors to blend together. In this case, I love how the magenta blends together with the yellow ochre of this flower. I proceed by creating another flower more towards the left corner because the paper in this area is still empty and there are no flowers. This is how I'm able to create a balanced composition where the flowers are spread all over the paper. I use the same technique, a little bit of pigment and a higher amount of water on my brush to create the first layer of petals. Since this flower has a round shape, all the petals lead to the same center. I then take my mop brush to start to create the greenery of this composition, stems and leaves. I always like to start from the stems, and to create the stems, I look where the center of these flowers is. Stems are coming out from the center of the flowers. I mix a little bit of sap green and yellow to start to create loose style leaves. Leaves are created between the flowers, and in this case I start with these leaves in a very light color. Therefore there is just a little bit of sap green mixed with yellow and a higher amount of water. I use the belly of my mop brush to create some leaves that are a little bit heavier, and the tip of my brush to create very light leaves. I then use more concentrated green, sap green, and allow it to blend into the wet pigment that is on the paper. I like to mix sap green with green earth to create different colors of green. It's important when I create the greenery that different sort of colors are next to each other in order to create a composition that is not boring to the eye and attracts the eye of the observer. I like to change the movement of my brush, sometimes using the belly of my brush and sometimes just the tip of my brush in order to create different strokes on the paper. And then I just remember to always blend into the wet layer of green a different color of green through the wet on wet technique. I like to add different and contrasting colors on these leaves. Therefore, I started to create leaves that are darker in colors by adding a little bit of blue, in this case, phthalo blue. I also love to mix violet with the green in order to create a green that is much darker and less bright, less vibrant. I'm creating these leaves, looking at the whole composition I've created so far, and I look where there are spaces and where I want the composition to be heavier with the greens. There is no specific rule, and I like to mix different colors and try with my hand to create different strokes in order to create these different leaves on the paper. I noticed that in the lower part of the paper, some greenery is missing. Therefore, I will start to create more leaves and more stems in the lower part of the composition now. I like how the mop brush gives me the possibility to create leaves that are very loose style. I feel a round brush doesn't give me the same chance when using the colors and pigments. Not all the leaves need to have a particular shape. Some can be created in a loose style just by touching the paper and create quite a simple stroke, like a C-shaped stroke, that will give the impression there is a green element in this composition. Remember to switch the colors and to allow the brush, whatever brush you're using, to play with water and the pigment. Some brush strokes are going to be more concentrated, while other brush strokes are going to be less concentrated in pigment and will have more water lay onto paper. Play with color, don't be afraid, just experiment and do what makes you feel good. At this point, I take my round brush in size 6 and I started to add the centers of these flowers. I start by using a little bit of yellow lemon dip and I touch just with the tip of my brush the center of the flower where the paper is still white, and I created these little points, little strokes. I then add a little bit of contrast by using a darker color, in this case burnt umber, and I just touch with the tip of my brush the same area where the yellow center of these flowers has been created. I then add a little bit of yellow lemon dip on this flower that has a darker center, and I just refine the shape of the center of the flower on the top. I create very little centers in these smaller flowers that have a different perspective, that are turned towards the bottom of the page. And at this point, the composition is completed. I hope you enjoy it.